So welcome to this public consultation meeting hosted by Waterfront Toronto. And they've invited the public in today to focus on the project that they have at Quayside, which includes a proposal that has been submitted for Quayside by Sidewalk Labs. My name is Nicole Swern, and I'm here as your lead facilitator today. Our firm was retained by Waterfront Toronto just under a year ago when they decided they would lead separately a series of public consultations to seek feedback on the proposal from Sidewalk Labs. An important note about our firm: we work only for public actors, governments and public agencies. We don't work for the private sector. And another important note is that our job is not to advocate for an outcome on the projects we work on. Our job is to make space for multiple voices to come together in order to inform public sector decision-making. It's also our job to document the conversations, and we will share a draft of what we hear today with all of you if you left us your email address, and we can read it on the sign-in sheet. I've already taken a quick look, and anyway, we'll try. We will also share a draft of the feedback received today, and we'll leave it with you for a week. And if you see anything major that's missing or off base or minor, let us know. And we always adjust in discussion with you. Sometimes it's something we don't question at all, and we think, oh yeah, they're right, we made a mistake. Other times it's, oh, well, I'm not sure how that went down, and we'll give you a call. And in every case, we then collectively become accountable for accurately documenting what happened. All of the meetings that have been held so far, where a diversity of views have been shared, are all available on Waterfront Toronto's website. Those are reports our team has documented. So in terms of what we've heard so far on this project, the first round of public consultation led by Waterfront Toronto was back in July, and then there was a follow-up meeting in November. And in the broadest of strokes, we are hearing three voices emerging related to this proposal for Quayside. There are some people who are extremely supportive, and I would say this is consistent with what we heard this morning as well. There are some people who are very supportive of this proposal, and in most cases, they're supportive related to innovation and the importance of moving forward on innovative things. This morning, they also talked about jobs, employment, technology opportunities, etc. We also know that there are many strong voices that have significant concerns and are opposed to this project. And they often cite lack of trust in this private actor. They are worried about partnering with companies that are affiliated with, so Sidewalk Labs, obviously sister company Google, parent company Alphabet, and they have identified many concerns about that private-public actor relationship. They want to see, if the project goes forward, which they're worried about, very clear balance of power, or how that power will be negotiated between the two actors, multiple actors. And then there's a group that have said cautious maybe. If it's going to go forward, it has to be on terms that work for Toronto. So we will see how this afternoon goes, but I would say it'd be fair to say that that was a similar flavor that emerged from this morning, and the room was as full, if not fuller than what we have now, so the public interest is fantastic. I just want to make a little note about the public interest. The public interest is a relationship between, there is no one public interest. There are multiple public interests, and there's relationships of power that evolve over time with different kinds of information, different understanding of consequences. For example, it didn't used to be in the public interest for women to vote, and now it is. We are, or it didn't consider to be in the public interest, right? There's relationships of power and interest, and we are at a very special time where there are a number of forces to be considered with respect to who's for, who's against, and why, and what kind of society we want to live in. And Waterfront Toronto's burden, and the three levels of government, their burden, is to try and find some common ground among these multiple interests, and that's one of the function of a public consultation. We try and create the space where people who have a different point of view have room to persuade somebody else of a new way to look at it, a new type of consequence, or a new type of benefit. And that's what we're going to try and do today. I have had calls where people are worried about speaking up because somebody who disagrees with them may attack them. So I just want to say I encourage you to show the kind of respect that you would expect to receive for your point of view, whatever that point of view may be. Ask questions. Make sure you are clear on if you're worried, if you're supportive, why. And this will help enrich our collective understanding, Waterfront Toronto's understanding, the city's understanding, and our collective understanding. Okay, so what's going to happen today? I'm going to look at the agenda that you would have all received on the way in. It also has a feedback form stapled to it. And so we're going to start off with a quick overview briefing from Waterfront Toronto. 25 minutes led off by the CEO, George Zagaric. And we also have Meg Davis and Christina Werner, who are going to walk through just the big picture and some of the results of their work to date. There are materials available on your table and online that support this presentation. And if you would like to provide feedback and you don't get a chance today because we do have many, many people, there is also an opportunity to go online to Waterfront Toronto's website, and anytime between now and the end of March, they're very interested in getting your feedback to the questions that they've posed. Now, you might not want to answer the questions they've posed, and you may come forward and say, actually, I wanted to talk about a different angle, or I have a different point of view. Go ahead. Every facilitator here is ready to work with what the interests are that people want to discuss. And you have now an idea of what Waterfront Toronto would find most useful, but you share what you think is most important to share. And they will also be taking a lot of notes. After that plenary presentation, there will be a series of breakout discussions, and those breakout discussions respond to what we heard at the last public round of consultation, which was organize this according to what you want, Waterfront Toronto, not according to necessarily how the information has been shared to date. So Waterfront Toronto has organized breakout rooms according to their objectives. You will have an opportunity to visit a couple of those. One is on sustainability, one on mobility, one on complete communities. That's where affordable housing and public realm are. And then economic development, digital, and partnership. And there are also digital examples in all of the rooms, because another thing we heard through public consultation is that digital isn't its own little box. It's integrated in many, many parts of this proposal. So I'm going to give you a sense of who's in the room. We have a number of sworn facilitators who are here, as I said, to help make space for a discussion. Just put your hand straight up. Good. Every small table, hopefully, will have room for one facilitator. Waterfront Toronto staff and board members are here as resources and also to listen. Put your hand straight up. Waterfront Toronto. Great. I think we've seen some people from other levels of government paying attention. Maybe put your hand straight up. Federal, provincial, municipal. Good. Thank you for coming. Elected officials, I think Councillor Joe Cressy, I heard. Maybe not. Adam Vaughan, did I hear? Adam Vaughan outside. So we've had elected officials also paying attention. So this is where, maybe Brendan, you can put up the slide. I want to introduce to you this little clicker that seemed to work very well at this stage in the meeting in the morning, where I'm going to get some feedback from you, because if I got you all to introduce yourselves, we'd be here all day. So there's this little clicker that we are going to use to seek some feedback from you. Responses are anonymous. Please hand it in on the way out. Apparently it won't work your television or anything else. That's Brendan's joke. Sorry, I stole it. You can change your mind with your response, and in some cases, and you will have 15 seconds to reply. So we're going to just try it out. The first question is, have you participated in a previous public meeting related to Quayside? And you'll have 15 seconds to do that. Have you previously participated? Just click 1 is a yes and 2 is a no. Okay, so we had 147 people that have clickers. 60 people have been here before, 87 people haven't. Welcome to everybody that's new. This morning, it was about 75 before and 150 that were new. So it is really great. We've got almost 230 people that have never been to a meeting before that are interested. Fantastic. Next question. Where in the city do you live? 1, Waterfront. 2, Toronto East York. 3, North York. 4, Etobicoke. 5, Scarborough. And 6, outside of Toronto, because we always get people from outside of Toronto. Give it a click. Okay, most people Toronto, East York, good chunk from the waterfront, and 27 outside of Toronto, suburbs, little light, but still decent, 13, thank you very much for those who and I think we probably have about 153 people in the room based on this bottom left circle here. So, lastly, from who did you find out about today's meeting? How did you find out about it? Waterfront Toronto sent you an email, social media website, another organization, a friend or colleague, coverage in the media, or other. I know you might have heard about it through multiple channels. Pick one. We're really practicing how to use these things. Okay, great. Waterfront Toronto got about a third of the people into the room. A full third came from a friend or a colleague. Thank you very much for referring people in, other organizations, coverage in the media, and other. That's fantastic. We are experimenting with these clickers. We are always striving to find a balance between a good qualitative discussion and a quantitative idea of how many people think a certain thing. But I made the point this morning, there's 3 million people that live in the city of Toronto, so we are always interested in how to strengthen a public consultation process, and this is one of the ways we're experimenting with it today. If you choose not to use your clicker, no problem. Okay. So what I'd like to do, thank you very much for indulging me through that setup. What I'd like to do is hand it straight over to George for the briefing, and then Megan, Christina, and you'll just go one to the next. Thanks very much.
That's great. Thank you, Nicole. My name is George Zagaric. As Nicole said, I'm the president and CEO of Waterfront Toronto, and I'm thrilled to see the attendance here. We were packed, in fact, standing room only this morning, and it's really important for us to hear your voice so we could guide our way forward as we hear from you today, but we'll have the opportunity also, we have online survey that you'll be able to participate and give us your comments between now and the end of March. Plus, we'll be getting feedback from government and other individuals. So thank you again for your participation. I'm going to turn this over to my staff very shortly, but I'm going to give you a quick overview. I think it's really important to start, first of all, with a little bit of reflection on the organization, Waterfront Toronto, who you may know a lot about, you may know very little about, but I'm going to look at it from the perspective of looking back at the origination or the startup of Waterfront Toronto and the view of the original chair, who was the commissioner of a task group 20 years ago. So I'm going to just touch on a few things. When you reflect back on the vision of Waterfront's mandate as established by our first chair, Bob Fung, who led the task force 20 years ago, the focus was really on a gateway to a new Canada. He, identified a place for experimentation, a place that was sustainable, and one that drives the innovation agenda. We really haven't varied much from the original view of the original chair. So I'm going to just touch a bit about his vision in a little more detail. So Fung envisioned a small, efficient, and action-oriented corporation. We're about less than 100 people at Waterfront Toronto, so we carry a big burden on a small number of shoulders, but that's the way the organization was originally envisioned, and it's the way we operate. Now, what do we focus on? We enhance Waterfront's economic and social cultural value, create an accessible and active waterfront for living, working, and recreation, revitalize the waterfront in a fiscally responsible manner, encourage the involvement of the private sector in development, and that encourages the public input into the development of the designated waterfront area, and that's why we're here today. So I'm going to just touch on a couple of things that you should know about how we actually work as an organization. 3 levels of government established us. They saw us as a master planner with a mandate to plan for the area, designated area. We actually sell off those lands and we take those investments for public interest investments, and that's what we've been doing over the last 20 years on affordable housing, on parks, on public realm, and on infrastructure. Now, we also have over that period of time evolved and asked for more of our developers. In fact, I'll touch on a bit of the LEEDs discussion, but we put requirements in for environmental sustainability, and I'll get into more detail on that. The procurement process we have is very transparent and open. We use government-directed public procurement, so it's a very transparent process. And over the period of time, the original investment by the 3 levels of government, each level put in $500 million, so $1.5 billion, has been paid back multiple times since that period, just on taxes, never mind the social and economic benefits that came from those investments. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the projects over that 20-year period, over the 2 decades. And when you look at the innovative parks that have been created and the public realm projects, we're quite proud. In fact, the one I point out here, Sherburne Common, takes a UV stormwater filtration system and embeds that into the park. So you see the water flowing and it's actually cleaning stormwater at the same time. We have people coming from other jurisdictions that marvel when they see this. This is why we do things, but we innovate. We try to add more in terms of the output of that investment. Now, the other ones that I want to just touch on, I mentioned this morning, I was envious as I was putting this together because I was shoveling a couple of days ago saying, oh my God, I need a beach real bad. But Sugar Beach is another award-winning project that Waterfront Toronto has worked on. It's been recognized. It's actually used in a lot of the travel brochures. Believe it or not, when people Google Toronto, I always think CN Tower is kind of the visible landmark for Toronto, but Sugar Beach comes up quite often in terms of the Google. So, we need to continue to take the opportunity to create opportunities at the waterfront to engage people, to activate it for the entire season. Now, we also have done, and this is the West Don Lands project, one of the things we do is not just revitalize, but we actually have to protect our lands. And one of the issues is we have a Don River that in extreme weather situations floods. So one of the early investments, and this was envisioned by the original board, is to make sure we do flood protection. And this was one of the projects we worked on, which is Corktown Common. And, I'm going to just turn to that. So instead of just doing a grass berm, we said, look, we have to actually create a flood protection zone that actually can be also activated as parks and as, quite frankly, as you can see, a very beautiful scene with the objective of having multiple purposes. So the other thing that we do is we look at, the public realm. And at Queens Quay, this is before, and I'll show you the after, which is, investing in transit, investing in bike lanes, making it activated so that people both in the city of Toronto and those visitors can actually enjoy the waterfront. The other thing is we've looked at areas that you wouldn't necessarily look at first with regards to activating, and that's an underpass, and this is Underpass Park. This has actually been a great opportunity to build in areas that would not have probably been the first choice in terms of activation, but it's been a great success and it's led to the Bentway project. And we've worked with the city and other partners on this, and we've gotten great public donations to help support these projects. The other thing that we've done, and I mentioned the first Corktown Common was the first flood protection project. We are now spending $1.2 billion that 3 levels of government have invested now in the Portlands project, flood protection project. Actually, we wouldn't be here talking about Quayside if we didn't do this project, because it's about opening up all this land and making sure that whatever we build will not be subject to potential high-level water flood protection. So one of the things I want to just point out is You know, I mentioned earlier the requirements that we put on some of our developers with regards to contractual agreements and developer agreements. So, you know, we led the way with some of the innovation on leads programming. So we required in the contracts that they had to meet a minimum standard of gold in terms of leads. And River City is one of the projects that I'm just going to point to, and that's over in the West Don Lands that met that requirement. But we don't stop at that. We expect more, and as should society expect more. So as we went along, we said gold was great, and it's a great objective. We need to push that bar up a little higher. And we've actually reached higher, and we've succeeded. So Aquilina, one of our developers, just last week received the LEED Platinum Award. It's the only residential LEED Platinum here in Toronto. So again, that's our objective, is to continue to improve on the investments that we put forward, not thinking statically about what we can do today, but what we can do tomorrow. And that's what a lot of the conversation is going to be about this afternoon. So I'm going to turn it over to Meg Davis, our Chief Development Officer, and I thank you for coming today. Thank you.
Thanks, George, and thanks everyone for spending your Saturday afternoon with us. So I want to explain a little bit about why Quayside's so important to us. We got the slide. So by 2030, 85% of the population will live in cities, and cities create 70% of the GHG emissions. So we're very vulnerable to climate change. But we're also struggling with congestion. I know all of us have experienced rush hour traffic in Toronto, and it gets longer every day, and we need to learn to manage, to find ways to manage that. We also have aging population, skyrocketing housing prices. We need to be able to build affordable housing for people to live downtown, and to build long-term care for seniors to be able to stay in the community that they love. But it's not all doom and gloom. We have an incredible booming economy. We're creating jobs. We have one of the busiest construction industries in North America, and we want to continue to grow, but we need to learn how to manage and find ways to manage that growth. So Waterfront Toronto is in actually a unique position to help manage some of those challenges. We own 12 acres of the waterfront called Quayside, and with that project, we want to develop something that will drive transformation on sustainability, affordability, and mobility, as well as economic development. So you can see on this map the designated waterfront area, and Quayside is the sort of yellow L shape, just down on the waterfront at, in case you don't know, it's at Parliament and Queen's Quay. And we wanted to use that land, as George said, to raise the bar again. And we did something a little bit different. We ran an RFP for an innovation and funding partner rather than just a developer. We wanted somebody to help us think about how to manage these tough urban challenges. And through that process, we selected Sidewalk Labs to work with us. So throughout the process, we've been listening to the variety of voices that Nicole mentioned. We listened to our government partners, the public, our advisory bodies. We also listened to the private sector because as a small, efficient organization, we need to leverage partnerships to get our work done. But it's very important that your voices are heard, and that's why we're here today, as George mentioned. So where are we in the process? We are having the public consultation meetings. Sidewalk Labs was brought on in 2017. They did their Master Innovation and Development Plan, which was released last June. We had a round of consultations last July, and we heard from people their concerns and thoughts. And we also had some concerns and thoughts about what we were seeing in the MIDP, and we articulated those to Sidewalk, and we resolved those in October, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And that resolution in October allowed us to continue on to do the technical evaluation, and that's why we're here today. We want to present the results of that technical evaluation for your thoughts. That technical evaluation was completed by Waterfront Toronto staff, subject matter experts who are expert in various fields, as well as an evaluation committee that guided the process. And collectively, it was determined that the proposals being put forward by Sidewalk had merit and some potential to solve some of these big urban challenges. Just on the October 31st resolutions, I think it's important for those who haven't been part of the consultation so far to see where we were and where we are now. So in July, we heard from folks that we really wanted to focus on the 12 acres, and we have limited this project to 12 acres. We're not considering anything past that. wanted to know whether or not the proposals or the solutions being proposed met Waterfront Toronto's objectives. And I think you'll see in the breakout rooms today that we feel that on balance they do. Strong control and oversight by governments, and we're making sure that that's in place. A strong regulatory framework. Sidewalk has agreed to abide by all current and future legislation, as well as our data principles and guidelines that we're working on now. Also, to complete a rigorous risk assessment, we have spent many, many hours doing risk assessment on this project, and we will have backstops and financial guarantees in all of our contracts should we choose to go forward. And then to get a good deal for Toronto. I think that's really important, and we will get fair market value, which today is $590 million for the land, and also commitment from Sidewalk Labs for a global patent pledge. So what happens next? So from today, we're going to absorb the comments that we received from this public consultation. We're going to be furthering our discussions with Sidewalk on the innovations and their financial commitment to the project. And we're going to be providing all of that information along with your comments to the board for their deliberations on May the 20th. If they decide not to go ahead with Sidewalk Labs, we will issue another RFP and find another partner. If we decide that we want to continue on working towards a solution with Sidewalk Labs, we will work on finalizing implementation agreements. And in that period of time, the City of Toronto will also run their own public consultation on the board's decision. So you'll have lots of time to input into that process as well. And should at the end of all that we decide to go into implementation with Sidewalk Labs, there will be all the regulatory and statutory approval processes that will have a lot of consultation and opportunities for you all to speak up. So there are 6 questions that we're trying to answer through today, and I'm going to ask Christina, our VP of Innovation, Sustainability and Prosperity, to come and talk to you about those.
Thank you, Meg, and good afternoon, everyone. So I am going to walk through a few of the framing questions that we have that we are trying to get answers to that will help our board inform an either yes or a no decision when it comes to whether or not to pursue the initiatives with Sidewalk Labs. You'll see the 6 questions in front of you, and really we think that in the category of the first 3 questions, the answer to those questions is yes. Do the solutions raise the bar on meeting urban challenges? Does the development plan align with the East Bayfront and Keating Channel precinct plans? And are we taking a comprehensive approach to managing data collection and use? And there's also questions that we have not yet fully resolved that still are a work in progress. So things that relate to the controls and managing partner risk, whether or not Sidewalk Labs is contributing enough to make the project work, and whether or not the proposed public investment in the solutions is appropriate. So we're really looking to you today to help us further inform those questions. The first question looks really at the urban challenges, and you'll see in front of you a list of 160 solutions that Waterfront Toronto went through and evaluated and categorized. From there, we feel that there was a compelling set of solutions put forward, and we could not necessarily have compiled this group of solutions in and of themselves as Waterfront Toronto alone. As you can see, most of the solutions will be financed and delivered by the private sector by the different iconography that has been provided. These would be solutions that would fall in the advanced infrastructure area or in the case of some of the building solutions that we put in place. We've also identified solutions that help advance government policy objectives and that governments may want to help finance, things like affordable housing. We've also identified solutions that may need some regulatory changes in order for them to be implemented, and we may need to work with policymakers to make that happen. So things like the tall timbers proposals that have been put forward. And then finally, there are a small number of solutions that Waterfront Toronto itself may seek to invest in that help us to achieve our objectives that we laid out in the RFP. So things like making the waterfront more accessible by using wayfinding beacons and some of the paving solutions that were put forward. Each of these areas will be explored more fulsomely in the breakout rooms that you'll go into after, but this is just a high-level overview of the type of categorization that we've used. As a high-level introduction, if we look at the sustainability objectives, which really looked at decoupling the population growth from the greenhouse gas emissions and having more environmentally friendly solutions around energy and more affordable solutions around energy for residents, There are a number of key solutions that we would have supported, including passive house design and how we could actually increase the energy efficiency of our buildings, and something like pneumatic waste or vacuum waste that we've looked at for a long time on the waterfront and trying to bring it here, that Sidewalk has also put forward. Complete communities really looked at increasing affordable housing, creating safer streets, and improving the access to the waterfront. There are solutions that we've supported around increasing the stock of affordable housing. I've mentioned the pavers and the wayfinding beacons, and also ways of doing more digitization of the utility mapping so that there's a better way of identifying where potential issues may arise. From an economic development perspective, this was really focused on catalyzing urban innovation and looking at how knowledge-based companies could be attracted to the waterfront, which builds on Waterfront Toronto's legacy of trying to build an innovation corridor in the East Bayfront neighborhood. Some of the supported solutions include the Urban Innovation Institute, a venture fund, and the Sidewalk Works program, which builds on the success of the Waterfront Toronto Employment Initiative. In new mobility, with a goal of reducing traffic congestion and reducing vehicular emissions and aiming towards Vision Zero, there were a number of areas that were quite compelling, including the discounted mobility package and increasing the presence of EV charging stations. That being said, I do want to point out that supporting these solutions does not mean that Waterfront Toronto has approved moving ahead with the project or a partnership with Sidewalk Labs. Support for certain solutions may change based on the feedback from the public, support from Sidewalk Labs, public policy priorities, or support from governments. Moving on to question 2, does the development plan align with the East Bayfront and Keating Channel precinct plans? And the answer to that, after a comprehensive assessment of the MIDP, is yes. There is a commitment for over 20% of affordable housing. It builds on our employment strategy, whereby we were seeking to create 8,000 new employment jobs in the precinct, 2/3, or actually 3/4 of which were intended to be in the information and communications technology area. No matter what happens, this project, it is important to point out, is subject to all of the statutory development application processes in the City of Toronto for their consultation. Question 3, are we taking a comprehensive approach to managing data and collection and use? The answer to that is yes, and we'll speak more about that in the digital room after. But if the project moves forward, all solutions must comply with existing and future legislative and policy requirements, as well as our digital principles that we've developed through consultation and the emerging intelligent community guidelines, which, similar to our minimum green building requirements, will have a higher level of standard than what would be available throughout other neighborhoods. They'll incorporate privacy by design. They will be subject to a number of different assessment frameworks as they move forward, including privacy impact assessments, algorithmic impact assessments, and that these requirements will be enforced through contract. Are there sufficient controls in place to address the risks associated with the implementation of this project? While all of this is still subject to further conversations and commercial negotiations with Sidewalk Labs, the project will only move forward if there are sufficient risk mitigation measures put in place. And these include, but aren't certainly not limited to, looking at the costs and liabilities that need to be covered should solutions fail, dealing with project delays that may be caused by any sort of regulatory barriers or alternatives should regulatory reform not be approved, and controls that manage the risk to Waterfront Toronto and the public. In addition to the ones that are noted here, it's important to note that after the consultation that we had in the earlier phases, one of the concerns that was raised was around human rights. So we're undertaking currently a preliminary human rights impact assessment, which may form another set of conditions that need to actually be applied to the project. The team that's here today that we're working with, that's working on the preliminary human rights impact assessment, if you could just raise your hand so people know who you are if they have questions about that process. Great. Thank you. Question 5, is Sidewalk Labs contributing enough to make the project work? This is still a work in progress, and the one thing that is very clear from the work that we've done is that Sidewalk Labs will be contributing far more than the public sector in terms of delivery on this project. Even if you look at just the sheer number of solutions that have been evaluated in terms of who would be delivering them, from the private sector, there would be 144, and from public investment, up to 35 of those solutions. That being said, it's not just Sidewalk Labs that would be responsible for the delivery of those 144 solutions. Sidewalk Labs has committed to design, funding, and delivery of advanced infrastructure. So these are things like vacuum waste, $100 million wishful thinking, $10 million for applied research through the Urban Innovation Institute, $10 million to support early-stage enterprises through the Venture Capital Fund, and commitments around construction jobs being dedicated for equity-seeking groups. They've also partnered with the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan and something called the Sidewalk Infrastructure Partners to deliver infrastructure throughout North America. Question 6, is the proposed public investments in the solutions appropriate? We've already established through the threshold issues that the land value is approximately $590 million. When you look at what those proceeds would be spent on, there's land servicing and municipal infrastructure, as well as affordable housing commitments, which are consistent with how Waterfront Toronto has reinvested funding from other land sales in the past. And then there is a specific part of that money that could be used to help fund innovations that are actually part of Waterfront Toronto, achieving Waterfront Toronto's vision. So things like the environmentally friendly solutions that help us to achieve our sustainability goals, or things that will help achieve accessibility and reliability for the infrastructure. So our purpose and goal today is really to get the feedback, your feedback, on the technical evaluation and recommendations on what ideas we should move forward with on Quayside. The staff has engaged with experts for several months to evaluate and assess the ideas put forward by Sidewalk Labs through the MIDP. And we've established a set of those ideas that we feel are worth pursuing, and now we want to know what you think and what are the things that you think we should be considering prior to making a decision. Before we move into the rooms, I actually just want to make a couple of other introductions that have joined us. I'd like to introduce some of the Waterfront Toronto board members. So Steve Diamond, if you're here, if you can just stand up. Steve Diamond, our board chair, and Wendy Cartwright. Great. Are any other board members here with us today? Okay. I also wanted to introduce the team from Sidewalk Labs that's here listening. If you could just raise your hand so people know. There are a few members of the Sidewalk team that want to hear your feedback as well, and we encourage you to interact with them if you have any follow-up questions for them as well. So with that, I'll hand it back to Nicole.
Great. Thank you, Christina. Okay, so what we'd like to do is just reiterate that there were a few questions that Waterfront Toronto thought it would be helpful to pose to you and get your feedback on. Do you think after, as you experienced today, or maybe based on what you've read before you got here, do you think the innovations really raise the bar on meeting the urban challenges? Why or why not? You have Waterfront Toronto's perspective on that, but they're also interested in hearing from you. Do you think that Waterfront Toronto has identified sufficient controls to manage risks, whether that's related to digital or partnership or project failure, technical innovations, etc.? What other controls would you like to see considered? Do you think that Waterfront Toronto has appropriately prioritized solutions for public investment? Why or why not? Are there some innovations you would like to see prioritized over others? If so, which ones and why? And what would you like to see in terms of commitments from Sidewalk Labs? These are the questions that Waterfront Toronto thought would be interesting to pose to you and see what you think. If those questions do not work for you, do not worry about it. And come because you're here, you're obviously interested in the project. If you have other thoughts to share, please share those. And all the facilitators have been briefed that the direction of the conversation will be based on the interests of the participants. Because it's a public meeting, it's for you. If these questions work, great. If not, focus on what you need to focus on. So in that spirit, I'm going to do your last kind of clicker thing before we move. Brendan, you want to pull up that last one? So what I'd like to get a sense of, just because we have a very full room and we have 35 facilitators, we probably needed 60 this morning. So for the Waterfront Toronto staff that are floating, if you see that there's a table where there is no independent facilitator, please join the table and take some notes. I know George was asking team members to do that this morning, so if you could do that, that would be great. Okay, so which topics are you most interested in discussing? And these are the topics that we will have for breakout room discussion. When you go there, you will have 10 more minutes of a little more detail on that topic, and we will have 2 rotations of that, where there will be a combination present, small table discussion, and a full room discussion. And then after 2 rotations, we'll be back here, and we will have an opportunity to address the group. We'll hear what happened in the rooms, and we'll have an opportunity to address the group.